A few days ago, I told you the story of a child whose name remained unknown to the police for 60 years. Forget about the killer. They didn't even know the child's name. Today, I bring you another such story of a child, but this time, the child's name was known, the killer was known, yet it was still called the crime of the century. This crime occurred 100 years ago. What was this crime? Who is this child? What happened to him? Who committed the crime? And the biggest question, how has this crime come into the spotlight again after 100 years? Today, I'll tell you all about it. Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. was a very adorable and mischievous child, born into a wealthy family. Charles's mother, Maura Lindbergh, was the daughter of a diplomat, and his father, Charles Lindbergh Sr., was a pilot. Not just any pilot, but a very famous one of that time, because Charles Lindbergh completed the world's first non-stop solo flight from New York to Paris, which was a big deal back then. Charles Lindbergh mingled with big and famous people of that era, making him a powerful figure. The Lindbergh family was small but had everything. However, one evening, this family lost everything. On March 1st, 1932, 20-month-old Charles Augustus was alone in his bedroom on the second floor of his home in East Amwell, New Jersey. It was raining heavily outside. Around 8 p.m., Charles Jr.'s caretaker put him to bed and then went to take care of other tasks. Charles Jr.'s mother and his father, Charles Sr., were not at home. They returned around 9 p.m., and the caretaker informed them that Charles Jr. was asleep. The couple then sat in their drawing room. Meanwhile, the caretaker went to check on Charles to see if he had woken up or was crying. It was around 10:30 p.m. When she went to the room, Charles was not there. She was terrified. She saw that the window was open. The child was too young to go anywhere by himself, but she still searched the room. When she couldn't find Charles, she immediately informed and Charles Sr. Their heart sank. They immediately informed the police. But as I mentioned, the Lindbergh family was no ordinary family. They were a famous, wealthy, and powerful family of that time, so before the police arrived, the media reached the scene. Some reports suggest that so many journalists arrived that some crucial evidence might have been destroyed. Nevertheless, the police arrived at the Lindberghs' house and began collecting evidence. Initially, the police found a wooden ladder propped against Charles Jr.'s bedroom window. It was clear that whoever took the child climbed up using this ladder and took the sleeping child with them. Along with the ladder, the police found a ransom note. Additionally, they found muddy footprints on the windowsill. It is said that when Charles Jr. was kidnapped, there were a total of 7 people present in the house, including his caretaker. For someone to place a ladder, enter the house, and take the child was a significant crime, especially to kidnap a child from a family like the Lindberghs. The next day, the news was published in the newspapers. The front page featured the child's picture, and it was reported that the Lindbergh baby had been kidnapped. The case was high profile from the beginning, so just 2 days later, the FBI also got involved. A large-scale investigation began, and in the meantime, the kidnappers contacted the Lindbergh family. The kidnappers demanded between $50,000 and $100,000. During this time, a man entered the scene. This man was once a principal at a school. His name was Dr. Condon. Local reports indicate that he contacted the Lindbergh family himself and offered to meet with the kidnappers and deliver the money. So now, on behalf of the Lindbergh family, Dr. Condon began negotiating with the kidnappers, trying to persuade them to reduce the ransom amount. Meanwhile, the Lindbergh family stated that if the person claiming to be the kidnapper truly had their child, they should provide proof before any ransom was paid. In response, the kidnapper sent the child's night suit. The parents recognized the night suit, and during this time, the kidnapper called Dr. Condon for a meeting. Dr. Condon went and reported that the kidnapper identified himself as John, though it was clearly a false name. A total of 12 notes were sent by the kidnapper. Dr. Condon eventually managed to negotiate the ransom down to $50,000, and on April 2nd, this amount was handed over to the person known as John. After receiving the money, this person gave Dr. Condon a receipt and a final note. In this 13th note, it was indicated that Charles Jr. would be found in a boat near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. The family's hope was rekindled, and they believed they would finally get their child back. The next day, a large number of police officers, FBI agents, and the Lindbergh family arrived at the location. Several teams were prepared to find the child, check the boat, and collect fingerprints and other evidence. Everyone reached the spot, but Charles Jr. was nowhere to be found. All the officers scoured every corner of the vineyard, but there was no trace of the child. A couple of days passed, and the police and the Lindbergh family thought that the kidnapper might come forward out of greed to demand more money. But that didn't happen. Days went by, and there were no further notes or communication from the kidnapper. Dr. Condon said he could identify the person who called himself John at a glance, but neither John nor the child was found. About 10 weeks had passed since the child was kidnapped, and officers were continuously trying to find him. In the meantime, on May 12, 1932, the police received information that the body of a child had been found. The body was discovered about 4 to 5 miles from where the Lindbergh family lived. The condition of the body was quite deteriorated, and it was only half buried. It was revealed that the child was none other than Charles Jr. The Lindbergh family was informed, and an autopsy was conducted. It was determined that the child's death was caused by a severe blow to the head. There was a hole in his head, and several body parts were missing. The report also revealed that the child had died 2 months earlier. The child had gone missing on March 1st, which meant he had died just a few days after being kidnapped, and the kidnapper had been lying. After the autopsy, the body was buried, and a nationwide hunt for the killer began. While the police officers believed the child was still in the kidnapper's custody, they had been exercising some caution, but now it was a murder case. And the murder of a child whose parents were quite prominent in America at that time. So, first, with information from Dr. Condon, a sketch of the person known as John was prepared. The sketch was published in newspapers and distributed as pamphlets everywhere. The public was asked for help in identifying the person, but despite this, the police came up empty-handed. In addition, the police also interrogated the people present in the house that night. During this time, a maid who worked at and Lindbergh's mother's house also came under suspicion. She was questioned a couple of times, but when called for questioning again, she committed suicide. However, it was later revealed that she had nothing to do with the case. Several months passed, and then a whole year went by. The police were still empty-handed. During the investigation, the police started finding gold certificates, which led them to a person's doorstep the following year. This person was named Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a carpenter by profession and a German national. Up until this point, the police did not have a strong suspect. So, they placed a few people to watch his house. Once the police were confident that he was the one, Bruno was finally arrested. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Bruno had a criminal record and had been to jail a couple of times. The officers searched his house and found a wooden ladder, and they took handwriting samples. It turned out that his handwriting matched the kidnapper's handwriting. The most crucial piece of evidence was that Dr. Condon identified Bruno as the suspect. Although Bruno continued to claim his innocence from the beginning, the case went to court, and the court sentenced Bruno to death. Even as he sat on the electric chair, Bruno maintained his innocence. At this point, the case had effectively come to an end. A child was kidnapped. It became a kidnapping case. A ransom was paid, but a few months later, the child's body was found. Ultimately, the suspect was sentenced, and that was kind of the end. But no, there's another aspect to this story that makes this case even more sensational because many people believe that in this case, and in the kidnapping of Charles Jr., it wasn't actually Bruno Richard Hauptmann, but Charles Lindbergh Sr. himself was the person who was involved. Many people consider Charles Sr. to be the real culprit. So basically, it was well known about Charles Sr. that he had a keen interest in eugenics and held it in high regard. He was enthusiastic about various experiments to achieve immortality. Eugenics, which had been the subject of the biggest scandal in science so far. At that time, research was being conducted on eugenics in America. So a former judge and true crime author, Lise Perlman, claimed that Charles Sr. arranged the kidnapping of his child for an experiment and that the child died during that operation or experiment. Lise theorized that the child had developmental disabilities, and that's why Charles Sr. wanted the child to be treated with eugenics. Lise's theory suggests that at that time, kidnapping children was quite common, so Charles chose that method. He had some doctor friends who were also involved in eugenics, might have taken his son for experimentation. However, Charles's plan did not go as intended, and the child died during the operation. Afterward, he manipulated the investigation according to his own terms. Lise claims that Bruno was always innocent, and there has never been solid evidence against him. Finding a ladder at home could be coincidental because he was a carpenter. All other evidence was circumstantial. Interestingly, Lise is not alone in this belief. In the past 100 years, hundreds of people have believed that Bruno was framed and that Charles Sr. was the real culprit. Bruno's great-great-grandniece and some other members of his family are trying to reopen the case. The family wants only one thing: for the truth to come out that Bruno did not commit that crime. Perhaps the full truth will come out after this. So, this was the crime of the century. What do you think about it? And who do you think was the real murderer of Charles Jr. according to you? Do share your thoughts with us through comments.